Legends say a wolf and a vampire can never be allies, only executioners. But tonight, the laws of nature aren't just being broken, they're being rewritten in blood. The curse you saw in the Moonlit Beach Hut was just the beginning. Now, the real nightmare has arrived. Kalin thought he was the apex predator. He was wrong. The Inquisitor Silas Vane has found the pack, and he brought a weapon that doesn't just kill wolves, it erases them. But Silas made a fatal mistake. By attacking the beach hut, he didn't just corner a pack. He woke up a god. Deep underground, a giant, black liquid eye opens in the ceiling of the cavern. Cut to Kalin's hand. It's no longer human. It's made of jagged shadow and obsidian claws. Deep beneath the earth, the Crimson Covenant has shattered. A 1,000-year-old entity is awake, and it's hungry. It doesn't want to kill Kalin. It wants to become him. Now, with his sister in chains and his humanity melting away, the Alpha must make an impossible choice. Die as a hero, or let the darkness consume his soul to become the monster he hates. You think you know how this ends? You don't, because the Kalin you knew is already gone. This is the Crimson Covenant. If you want to see the birth of a creature that even vampires fear, subscribe now and turn on notifications. The eclipse has begun, and no one is getting out alive. The Crimson Covenant blood of the eclipse. The moon was a sharp, silver hook hanging in the black sky, pulling at the wild thing living inside Kalin's chest. He stood on the edge of the shore, the cold Atlantic water soaking into his boots as he stared at the beach hut. It was a small, broken building, but to a werewolf, it smelled like 1,000 years of death and old magic. The scent of salt was mixed with something metallic, the smell of the ancient vampire curse he had accidentally woken up. Kalin's golden eyes glowed in the dark, reflecting the light of the moon that was demanding he change his shape. His bones felt like they were made of hot lead, shifting and grinding under his skin. Behind him, the forest was silent, as if every animal was waiting for the Alpha to lose control. He looked at Saraphene, the pale woman standing by the door. She wasn't human, and she wasn't a wolf. She was a shadow given form, and her presence made the wolf inside Kalin howl with a primal need to protect his territory. The night was young, but the air already felt thick with the promise of a hunt that would never end. Fenric stepped out from the tree lean, his own eyes flickering with a restless amber light. He was the pack's strongest warrior, but even he looked small compared to the heavy energy rolling off the beach hut. He growled at Kalin, a low sound that vibrated in the sand beneath their feet. He wanted to know why the Alpha was standing so close to a blood drinker. To a werewolf, vampires were a mistake of nature, creatures that didn't belong in the cycle of life and death. Kalin didn't answer because his jaw was already beginning to lengthen, his teeth sharpening into jagged points. The wind shifted, bringing a new scent that made both wolves freeze. It wasn't the smell of a predator, but the smell of cold, hard silver. In the distance, a twig snapped with a sound like a bone breaking. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, the footsteps of someone who didn't care about being quiet. Humans were coming, and they were armed with the one thing that could turn a werewolf's blood into poison. The hunt had changed. The wolves were no longer the ones doing the tracking. Kalin felt the hair on his neck bristle as the scent of silver grew stronger. He turned his head, his ears twitching as they caught the sound of metal clicking against metal. Out of the mist stepped Silas Vane, a man whose heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm that didn't show any fear. He wore a long coat that smelled of gunpowder and chemicals. On his belt sat a row of silver-tipped bolts that shimmered in the moonlight like dragon scales. Silas looked at the two massive men and the pale vampire, as if they were nothing more than targets in a shooting gallery. He held a strange device that hummed with a high-pitched sound, making Kalin's sensitive ears bleed. This was the Inquisitor, a man who had spent his life studying how to kill things that went bump in the night. He didn't see the beauty of the wolf or the history of the pack. He only saw monsters that needed to be erased. Saraphene retreated into the hut's shadows, her red eyes fixed on the silver at the man's waist. The tension was so tight, it felt like it would snap the world in half. Silas Vane didn't waste time with words. He He raised his hand, and a dozen red laser dots appeared on Kalin's chest, coming from the dark trees behind the beach. The Inquisitor smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. He told Kalin that the rest of the pack was already surrounded and that his sister, Kira, was being held in a silver cage. The news hit Kalin harder than a physical blow. His wolf surged forward, wanting to rip the man's throat out, but the red dots stayed steady on his heart. Silas wanted the ancient power hidden under the floorboards of the hut, a power that only an alpha's blood could unlock. He treated the sacred history of the werewolves like a prize to be stolen. Kalin looked at Fenric, seeing the same desperate rage in his friend's eyes. They were the kings of the forest, but here on the sand, they were trapped like animals in a snare. The moon seemed to grow larger, its light pressing down on Kalin, urging him to forget his humanity and become the beast he was born to be. The transformation started before Kalin could stop it. It wasn't the slow, painful shift of a normal night. It was an explosion of fur and muscle fueled by pure desperation. His shirt tore away as his shoulders widened and his spine curved into a powerful arch. He let out a roar that drowned out the sound of the crashing waves, a sound that signaled the beginning of a war. Silas Vane stepped back, but he didn't look afraid. He looked excited. He signaled his men, and the air was suddenly filled with the whistle of silver bolts. One grazed Kalin's shoulder, the metal burning his skin like a brand. He felt the poison starting to work, a cold fire spreading through his veins. Fenric shifted beside him, a massive gray wolf that lunged into the mist to find the hidden shooters. Saraphene watched from the porch, her hands glowing with a dark, flickering light. She was waiting to see who would win before she made her move. Kalin stood his ground, a towering beast of shadow and gold, ready to bleed for his pack and his sister. The air exploded with a sharp crack of rifle fire, drowning out the ocean's roar. Kalin felt the impact before he heard the sound. A silver bolt tore through the muscle of his shoulder, burning like liquid nitrogen. The smell of searing flesh hit his nose, mixing with the metallic tang of his own blood. His wolf instinct screamed kill, but his human mind screamed protect. He threw his massive, fur-covered body in front of the door, using his own bulk as a shield for the entrance. Fenric was a gray blur of teeth and rage, snapping at the silver bolts that whizzed past his ears. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that threatened to force Kalin back into his human form. But he couldn't shift now. If he became human, the silver would kill him instantly. He dug his claws into the wooden porch, splintering the rot, and let out a howl that shook the glass in the windows. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a command to the forest, calling on ancient spirits that Silas Vane could never understand. The sand around the hut began to swirl, whipped up by an invisible pressure. The battle had begun, and the beach was about to become a graveyard. From the shadows of the hut, Saraphene moved with a grace that defied gravity. She didn't run. She flowed like ink spilled in water. While the wolves were creatures of muscle and bone, she was a creature of the void. She raised a pale hand, her fingers tracing a symbol in the air that left a trail of crimson smoke. Suddenly, the shadows under the trees stretched and snapped like rubber bands, grabbing the ankles of the hidden shooters. Screams of terror erupted from the mist as Silas's men were yanked downward into the earth. The Inquisitor cursed, firing his sonic device at the vampire, but she dissolved into a mist of bats before the beam could touch her. Kalin watched with glowing eyes, his wolf mind confused by this ally. Vampires were the enemy, the cold leeches of the night. Yet, this woman fought with a fury that matched his own. Her magic smelled like ozone and old graves, a scent that made Kalin's hackles rise. He realized then that the curse bound them in more ways than one. If she died, the magic holding his wolf form together might unravel, leaving him defenseless against the silver. Inside, Fenric barked, his voice rough and guttural. The gray wolf had taken a hit to his flank, and his blood was leaving a dark trail on the white sand. Kalin didn't hesitate. He grabbed Fenric by the scruff of his neck, dragging him through the shattered doorway of the beach hut. Saraphene materialized inside, slamming the heavy wooden door shut. She muttered a word that sounded like snapping bone, and the symbols on the door flared to life, creating a temporary barrier against the silver bullets outside. The hut was dark, smelling of mildew and the lingering scent of the trapped curse. The noise of the battle outside became a dull thrum, like heavy rain on a tin roof. Kalin shifted back to his human form, his body crashing to the floor as the adrenaline left him. He gasped for air, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The silver was still inside him, a poison that prevented his werewolf healing from working. He looked at the floorboards in the center of the room. They were vibrating, humming with a low frequency that rattled his teeth. The power Silas wanted wasn't just under the hut. It was trying to get out. Kalin crawled toward the center of the room, his vision swimming with black spots. He swept aside a rotten rug, revealing a trapdoor made of black iron. It had no handle, only a depression in the shape of a wolf's paw print. The curiosity in his chest flared brighter than the pain. This wasn't just a basement. It was a piece of history his pack had forgotten. The carvings on the iron depicted a war between wolves and shadows, a battle that had happened centuries before Silas Vane was even born. Fenric, now in human form and clutching his side, looked at the trapdoor with fear. "That smells like death, Kalin," he whispered. But Kalin knew they had no choice. The barrier on the door was cracking under the assault of Silas's technology. He placed his bloody hand onto the paw print. The iron drank his blood, glowing with a soft, ominous blue light. With a groan of ancient gears, the trapdoor hissed open, revealing a stone staircase that spiraled down into the dark. A rush of cold air flew up, carrying the scent of underground rivers and something else, something asleep that was breathing. They descended into the earth, leaving the sounds of the modern world behind. The staircase was carved directly into the bedrock, slick with moisture that tasted like copper. Saraphene took the lead, her natural night vision allowing her to see the dangers ahead. Kalin supported Fenric, his arm wrapped around his friend's waist. Every step down felt like walking backward in time. The walls were covered in bioluminescent moss that glowed with a faint green light, revealing murals painted in ochre and charcoal. Kalin stared at the images, his mind racing. They showed the first alpha wolf making a pact, not with the moon, but with an eclipse, a black sun surrounded by a ring of fire. This was the Crimson Covenant the legend spoke of. It wasn't just a story to scare pups, it was a warning. The murals showed wolves turning into monsters of shadow, creatures that consumed everything in their path. Kalin realized with a sickening jolt that the curse wasn't external. It was a dormant gene in his own bloodline, waiting for the right trigger. And he had just pulled it. The bottom of the staircase opened into a massive cavern, vast enough to hold a cathedral. In the center lay a lake of still, black water that acted like a perfect mirror. Suspended above the water was a crystal shard the size of a man, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Kalin's own heart. As soon as his boot touched the cavern floor, the crystal flared red. Kalin gasped, falling to his knees as his blood began to boil. It wasn't the silver poisoning this time. It was the call of the source. His wolf spirit surged against his skin, trying to tear its way out, but not to protect him. It wanted to join the crystal. It wanted to submit to the power. "Fight it, Alpha!" Saraphene shouted, her voice echoing off the cavern walls. She rushed to him, placing her cold hands on his burning forehead. The contact sent a shock wave through the room, causing the black lake to ripple. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, forming vague, humanoid shapes that turned their blank faces toward the intruders. The Guardians of the Covenant had woken up, and they didn't look happy to see a vampire touching their air. Fenric drew a knife from his boot, standing back-to-back with Saraphene as the shadow figures closed in. "They don't smell like anything," Fenric growled, panic edging his voice. A wolf relies on scent to track and fight, but these enemies were voids in the air. One of the shadows lunged, passing straight through Fenric's blade and slamming into his chest. Fenric flew backward, landing near the edge of the Black Lake. He screamed as the water grasped his ankle, pulling him toward the deep. "Fenric!" Kalin roared, forcing himself to stand despite the fire in his veins. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his will. For the first time, he didn't just command his pack, he commanded the darkness around him. A tendril of shadow shot from Kalin's own shadow, wrapping around Fenric's arm and hauling him back to safety. The other shadow figures froze, turning their heads toward Kalin. They recognized the power. He wasn't just an intruder anymore. He was a contender for the throne of the Eclipse. But using that power felt wrong, like swallowing ice shards. It was seductive, but it was cold. The silence in the cavern was broken by a mechanical whirring from the top of the stairs. Silas Vane had breached the trapdoor. A canister dropped down the spiral shaft, clinking against the stone steps before landing at their feet. It hissed, releasing a thick, white gas that smelled of garlic and processed silver nitrate. "Gas!" Saraphene choked, covering her face with her cloak. The gas burned Kalin's eyes and lungs, cutting off his connection to the shadow power. He coughed, his vision blurring. He could hear the heavy boots of the Inquisitor's team descending the stairs, the rhythmic clanking of their armor echoing like a death march. They were trapped. Behind them was a lake of dark magic. In front of them was a squad of hunters designed to kill them. Kalin looked at the crystal pulsing above the water. It was the only weapon they had left. But using it meant giving in to the monster inside, the very thing the murals warned against. He looked at Fenric, gasping for air on the floor, and made his choice. He would rather be a monster than a corpse. Silas emerged from the smoke, wearing a gas mask that made him look like a giant insect. He didn't seem impressed by the cavern or the magic. He only saw resources to be mined. "Secure the specimen," he ordered, pointing at Saraphene. 2 hunters fired nets made of electrified silver wire. Saraphene shrieked as the net wrapped around her, the electricity frying her skin. Kalin felt her pain as if it were his own, a jolt that snapped his last thread of control. He didn't shift into a wolf. He shifted into something else. His fur grew in patches of obsidian darkness, and his claws elongated into blades of solid shadow. He moved faster than eyesight, crossing the distance to the hunters in a blink. He swiped his claws, and the hunter's armor sheared like paper. Silas fired his sonic weapon, but the sound waves just absorbed into Kalin's shadow form. For a moment, Kalin felt invincible. He was the apex predator of the dark. But then he saw his reflection in the black lake. He didn't have eyes anymore. He only had 2 burning voids of crimson light. Silas Vane, realizing his weapons were useless against this new form, pulled a lever on a device he had set up near the stairs. A high-pitched frequency blasted through the cavern, designed to disrupt the crystal's resonance. The crystal above the lake cracked. A beam of pure red energy shot out, hitting Kalin square in the chest. The impact threw him back, separating the shadow from his body. He landed hard, human again, gasping and naked on the cold stone. The crystal shattered completely, and from its remains, something began to drip. It wasn't water or blood. It was a thick, black sludge that defied gravity, flowing upward toward the ceiling. The cavern shook as a low voice vibrated in everyone's skulls. Wolves, vampires, and humans alike. The seal is broken. The sludge coalesced into a giant eye that opened in the ceiling of the cave. It stared down at them with an ancient, hungry intelligence. This wasn't just a power source Silas could steal. It was a living entity, an old god of the Eclipse that had been starving for 1,000 years. And now, thanks to the conflict, dinner was served. The beach hut was never a tomb. It was a cage. And Kalin has just handed the key to something far worse than a vampire. With the ancient god awake and his sister still in chains, the Alpha must decide. Does he trust the vampire who betrayed him, or the human who wants to destroy him? Who is the real monster? What would you do? Would you save your pack by joining the shadows, or die as a free wolf? Tell us your choice in the comments below. And if you want to see Kalin unleash the beast in episode 3, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. The eclipse has only just begun. The giant eye in the ceiling didn't blink. It radiated a pressure that felt like the bottom of the ocean, crushing the air out of everyone's lungs. A low hum vibrated through the cavern, causing the hunters' flashlights to flicker and burst. The black sludge that had dripped upward now began to rain back down, sizzling where it touched the stone floor. One of Silas's men screamed as a drop landed on his armor, melting through the metal in seconds. The orderly discipline of the Inquisitor's squad evaporated instantly. They opened fire on the ceiling, their bullets sparking uselessly against the liquid darkness. Silas Vane stood frozen, his gas mask hiding his expression, but the way his hands shook betrayed his terror. His technology was built to fight biology, not theology. He had woken up a god, and he had no idea how to put it back to sleep. Kalin forced himself to his feet, his naked skin stinging from the cold air. His wolf instincts were silent, cowed by a predator that was too big to fight. He looked at the chaos and realized that if he didn't move now, they would all be digested by the room itself. Kalin's eyes locked on Saraphene. She was still thrashing under the electrified silver net, her pale skin smoking where the wires touched her. The vampire hissed in agony, her eyes rolling back in her head. Despite everything, the ancient rivalry, the distrust, the fact that her kind was the enemy, Kalin knew he needed her. She was the only one who understood the magic of this place. He sprinted across the melting floor, dodging falling globs of black sludge. He grabbed the edge of the net, the silver burning his hands like holding a hot coal. He gritted his teeth, channeling the pain into strength, and ripped the mesh apart with a roar of exertion. Saraphene scrambled free, her movements jerky and weak. She didn't say thank you. She just looked at the ceiling and whispered a word in a dead language. A bubble of translucent red energy formed around them, deflecting the corrosive rain. "We have to leave," she rasped, clutching Kalin's arm for support. Her touch was ice cold, but it steadied him. They were an impossible pair, wolf and bat, huddled together against the end of the world. "Fenric," Kalin shouted, his voice cracking over the roar of the crumbling cavern. His beta was struggling to stand near the edge of the lake, his leg twisted at a bad angle. The shadow figures that had emerged earlier were now circling him, waiting for the black water to rise and claim him. Kalin abandoned the safety of Saraphene's shield and charged. He didn't have his wolf form, but he had the brute strength of an alpha. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the nearest shadow figure, expecting to pass through it. Instead, he made solid contact, shattering the entity into wisps of smoke. The connection to the crystal had made them solid enough to kill. He grabbed Fenric by the tactical vest and hauled him up. "Run or die, brother," Kalin growled. Fenric nodded, his face pale and sweaty, but his eyes burned with the stubborn refusal to quit. The pack bond flared between them, a warm golden thread in the cold darkness. As long as they drew breath, no wolf would be left behind. They limped back toward the stairs, a three-legged animal desperate to survive. Silas Vane was blocking the exit. He stood at the base of the spiral stairs, firing his sonic weapon wildly into the dark. "Moo!" Kalin barked, shoving the Inquisitor against the damp wall. Silas spun around, leveling his pistol at Kalin's chest. For a second, time stopped. The human wanted to kill the monster, even while the roof was falling in. "Shoot me, and you die here alone," Kalin said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's the only one with a shield." He pointed to Saraphene, who was holding the red barrier against the encroaching sludge. Silas looked at the vampire, then at his melting soldiers, and finally lowered the gun. It wasn't mercy, it was calculation. He realized his only ticket out of hell was the very creatures he came to exterminate. "You lead," Silas spat, his voice distorted by the mask. "But if you try anything, the wolf dies." It was a fragile, hateful truce, forged in the fires of necessity. Kalin didn't trust him for a heartbeat, but an enemy with a gun was better than a god with an appetite. The climb up the spiral staircase was a nightmare. The stone steps were slick with moisture and slime, making every foothold a gamble. Behind them, the cavern was filling up with the black liquid, rising like floodwater in a storm. The giant eye in the ceiling had dissolved, becoming part of the rising tide that chased them. It didn't rush. It flowed with an inevitable, sluggish hunger. The sound from below were the worst part. The wet, squelching noise of the sludge consuming the bodies of the fallen hunters. Kalin supported Fenric on his left, his shoulder screaming in pain where the silver bolt had hit him earlier. Saraphene took the lead, her night vision cutting through the gloom. "Don't look back," she warned, her voice tight. "It feeds on fear as much as flesh." But Kalin could feel it. The entity wasn't just chasing their bodies. It was scratching at the back of his mind, whispering promises of power and oblivion. He focused on the rhythm of Fenric's breathing, using the mundane sound to anchor himself to reality. Step by step, they climbed away from the abyss. Halfway up, the staircase shuddered violently. A section of the wall exploded inward, showering them with rock and dirt. A tendril of the black sludge had punched through the stone, cutting off the path ahead. It lashed out like a whip, grabbing one of the surviving hunters who was trailing behind Silas. The man didn't even have time to scream before he was yanked through the hole in the wall. Silas didn't stop. He didn't even look back. He scrambled over the debris, pushing past Kalin to get away from the gap. "It's in the walls," Fenric yelled, panic rising in his scent. The entity wasn't just filling the room below. It was permeating the bedrock, surrounding them like an infection. Kalin shoved Fenric forward. "Go! Climb!" he roared. He turned to face the tendril, grabbing a loose rock from the steps. When the black tentacle struck again, Kalin slammed the rock down, not on the limb, but on the staircase wall, causing a mini avalanche that buried the hole. It bought them seconds, but seconds were all they had. The mountain itself was trying to eat them. They saw the trapdoor above them, a square of faint light that looked like heaven. But just as they reached the final turn, Silas Vane stopped. He turned, kicking Saraphene in the chest. The vampire tumbled backward, knocking into Kalin and Fenric. They nearly fell off the narrow stairs, barely catching themselves on the railing. Silas scrambled through the trapdoor and slammed it shut. The sound of the heavy iron bolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot. "He locked us in," Fenric gasped, staring up at the iron grate in disbelief. The rising sludge was only a few turns below them now, the heat radiating from it making the air hard to breathe. Kalin felt a rage so pure it nearly blinded him. It wasn't the heat of the wolf. It was the cold, calculating fury of a man betrayed. He looked at the trapdoor, then at the intricate carvings on the wall beside it. Saraphene was already there, her fingers tracing the stone. He locked the iron. She hissed, her eyes glowing red. But iron bends to blood. She bit her own wrist, smearing the dark vitality over the stone seal. The stone around the trapdoor hissed and dissolved, the ancient magic reacting to the vampire sacrifice. The iron door didn't open. It fell inward, its hinges melted by the blood spell. Kalin didn't wait. He vaulted through the opening, dragging Fenric with him, and rolled onto the floor of the beach hut. The fresh air smelled like salt and freedom, but it was tainted by smoke. Silas was already gone, his boot prints leading out into the night. But he hadn't escaped cleanly. The beach hut was on fire, set ablaze by the Inquisitor to cover his tracks and bury the evidence. The flames licked at the rotting wood, creating a ring of fire around the open trapdoor. "The seal!" Saraphene screamed, pulling herself up from the hole. "We have to close it." If they left the tunnel open, the entity would pour out into the world. Kalin looked at the burning beams of the roof. He grabbed a massive, charred timber and, with a roar of effort, leveraged it over the hole. It wasn't a permanent seal, but the burning would collapse the tunnel entrance, burying the horror under tons of rubble. They stumbled out of the burning hut and onto the cool sand, collapsing near the water's edge. The ocean lapped at their boots, indifferent to the nightmare they had just survived. The hut behind them was an inferno, a funeral pyre for the secrets it had held. Kalin rolled onto his back, staring up at the moon. It was no longer silver. It was tinged with a reddish hue, as if reflecting the fires below. Fenric was alive, breathing heavily, his leg needing urgent attention. Saraphene sat apart from them, Hugging her knees, her skin burned and gray. They had survived, but they hadn't won. Silas Vane had escaped with the knowledge of the sight. The entity was awake, stirring beneath the earth. In the pack, Kalin sat up, scanning the tree line. The forest was too quiet. There were no birds, no crickets, and no wolves howling to welcome their alpha home. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was empty. The hunters had done their job efficiently, while Kalin was underground. Kalin stood up, ignoring the agony in his shoulder and the exhaustion in his bones. He walked to the edge of the forest, sniffing the air. He smelled gasoline, tire tracks, and the fading scent of his sister, Kira. They had taken her. Silas Vane hadn't just escaped. He had taken his leverage with him. Kalin turned back to the burning hut, his silhouette framed by the flames. He looked at Saraphene, then at Fenric. The lines between friend and enemy had been burned away tonight. There was no more pack, no more solitary vampire, no more simple life. There was only the hunt. Kalin reached down and picked up a piece of silver shrapnel from the sand, squeezing it until his blood dripped onto the beach. It sizzled, turning black before it hit the ground. The infection from the cave was in his blood now. He wasn't just an alpha anymore. He was something new, something worse. He looked at the camera, his eyes shifting from gold to a deep, void-like crimson. "Run, Silas," he whispered to the wind. "Run while you can. The beast has evolved, and the hunter has become the prey." But with the ancient gods stirring beneath the earth and Kira in the hands of the Inquisitor, Kalin is running out of time. The infection has begun. Can Kalin control the new darkness in his blood, or will he destroy the very sister he's trying to save? The war for the supernatural world starts now. If you're ready for the hunt, smash that like button and subscribe. You do not want to miss what happens when the Alpha finally catches the Inquisitor. Episode 3 is coming, and it's going to be a bloodbath.